Are you trying to establish your brand as a thought leader? Start a podcast, invite industry experts to be guests on your show, and watch your brand become the prime resource for decision makers in your industry. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of SWEETFISH Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Hey everyone, before we get into this episode, I wanted to give a shout out to today's sponsor, MailTag.io. MailTag is a Chrome browser extension for Gmail that allows you to track and schedule your emails as well as create pings. Super useful automated follow-up sequences. It's a really helpful tool that I highly recommend if you're in sales because you can get real-time alerts about your email opens and link clicks right on your desktop, as well as access a powerful dashboard for even more insights. For more info, be sure to check out mailtag.io or just use the link in the show notes. All right, let's get into the episode. Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. This is going to be another Behind the Curtains episode. If you're new to this show, the Behind the Curtains series is where James and myself and other members of the SWEETFISH team are sharing a look behind the curtain at our company, things that we're learning and how we're growing. And so today is going to be myself. I'm Logan Lyles, Director of Partnerships here at SWEETFISH Media. I am joined by James. James, how you doing today, man?
I am fantastic, man. Stoked to dive into this.
Awesome. Well, today, James is going to break down a topic that has been top of mind for him, came up with a conversation with a friend that you were telling me about the other day, James, and this idea that your process is more important than the results. So I'd love to dive right into this. I think you had an analogy that kind of lays the foundation for this idea and helps us visualize it, centered around playing blackjack, right?
Yeah. So my friend Kenny and I were talking a couple weeks ago about this concept of your process being more important than your result. And, I'm personally going through something right now. It's probably one of the most difficult things I've ever had to go through in my life. And maybe at some point I'll kind of open up the kimono as far as what that is. But there are a lot of different factors that are not allowing me to share it publicly right now. And because of this thing that I'm going through on the personal side, Kenny was just helping me kind of think through, what my process is for handling this particular issue. And he compared it to, playing blackjack. So if you're familiar with blackjack, you know that the statistical likelihood of you going over, if you hit on 18, if you have, 2 nines and you hit, the likelihood of you going over is much higher. But if, let's say, 3 out of 4 times you hit on 18 and you still come in under 21, you cannot let that short-term success let you think that you have a good process. You've got to actually analyze your process and know that the way you're making this decision is actually good for the long term, not just the short term. And so it just kind of brought up this idea of like, okay, well, how do you know if your process is good or not? Obviously, the results that you've been getting from the way you've been doing something, at least in the short term. But how do you know if that process is good? And as I was talking through it with Kenny, he was like, well, you bring in someone else to evaluate that process, and the person that you bring in needs to have achieved the result that you ultimately want to achieve. And so whether that's, if it's related to business, maybe you bring in somebody that's, owned their own business for a decade or more, or if it has to do with, your personal life, a decision that you make with your child or your spouse, you're not really sure how to address a certain thing that your kid is doing, or you find yourself saying the same thing whenever you get in a particular argument with your spouse or whatever, bringing in someone that has been in the game longer than you and say, hey, this is how I'm doing this currently. It seems to be working. Sometimes it doesn't. What are your thoughts on that? And I think that openness and vulnerability to invite other people in to your decision-making process is actually really, really valuable. Do you have any thoughts on that, Logan?
I like what you said there in also being very intentional about who you bring in from the outside to evaluate it. To throw another analogy out there, if you were looking for help on your golf swing, you wouldn't ask a tennis pro. You would look for someone who's a golf pro. So, not just saying, oh, this person, I really value their input. Well, maybe they don't have any business experience and you're looking for help with a business problem, or, like you said, it's a marital thing. Don't go ask, two buddies who are lifelong bachelors or something like that. So I think that was one of the biggest things that I took away from what you just said there.
Yeah, I think that was just this idea that your process is more important than the result, because it was just really powerful for me, because so often I look at the result of what I've done in the past and I just let that dictate what I do moving forward, and instead shifting to going, no, what was actually my decision-making process for making the decision that I needed to make, and let's evaluate that, and bringing in the right person to do that, I think was just something really valuable. And as I was talking about it with Kenny, it really kind of helped me think through my own situation and who I need to bring in to have that conversation with, and to, openly ask them to evaluate kind of my thinking and how I got to the place that ultimately, allowed me to make the previous decision. So hopefully that is helpful for folks listening to this. This is a relatively short episode today, but just be thinking about the importance of your decision-making process and how that is much more important in the long term than the short-term results that you've been getting. Logan, do you have anything to add before we close it out?
Yeah, I think going back to your original analogy, just because you've been winning 75% of the time, hitting on 18 doesn't mean that that's a good process. So just kind of getting things together, preparing for that conversation with someone else that you're going to bring in from the outside, maybe bring in more than just one voice from the outside. And, they're probably going to ask some questions to have you peel back the onion and look at, okay, well, when did this happen? How did this happen? So there's probably some prep you need to do going into that conversation, because you've probably been thinking about it. Well, this is kind of what I've been doing. This is kind of what's working. They're probably going to have a fresh perspective and want to drill into it a little bit more. So kind of maybe prepare for that a little bit. But I think it's phenomenal advice.
And something else that Kenny had mentioned while he and I were talking about it, he said, you might have a certain, way of, or a certain methodology that allows you to hit on 18 and still win the majority of the time. You may have some insider knowledge, or, you be maybe counting cards in a certain way that makes it to where hitting on 18 makes sense. And so just because someone else pushes back on your process that maybe has achieved the result that you're wanting doesn't necessarily mean they're right and you're wrong. But have that conversation and say, well, this is why I'm making this decision now, because, I understand this nuance in the marketplace, or, we have this particular, person on our team that puts us in a different position than our competitors. And so because we have this talent on our team, we're able to do this instead of that. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that just because your process is different that it is worse. I think a lot of innovation happens because someone's, you look at Elon Musk, like the process of how he's gone about putting rockets into space and putting new cars on the road in an insanely quick amount of time. His process is probably a whole lot different than Ford and Chevy and the traditional, car manufacturers. So different does not mean that it's wrong, but I think it is worth at least having a conversation and inviting other people into that process. So Hopefully, if you're listening to this, you enjoyed today's episode, and we are incredibly, incredibly grateful for your attention. So thank you so much for listening.
Digital marketing agencies have a tough job. You have to stay on top of the latest marketing strategies for your clients and your agency. What if there was a way you could address both at the same time? Imagine your agency putting out content with greater quality and quantity. Envision bringing your clients a turnkey solution for one of B2B marketing's fastest growing media strategies, podcasting. You know all those clients asking for your help with their account-based marketing efforts? Picture being the first to bring them the idea of content-based networking, showing them the proven strategy for breaking into their most coveted accounts. Here's the concept. SWEETFISH Media is looking to work with a limited number of innovative agencies interested in a new partnership model. We produce a podcast for your agency. You introduce the power of podcasting and SWEETFISH services to your clients. Everybody wins. Learn more at sweetfishpartners.com.